The call came in at 5:47 a.m. on September 12, 2024, to the West Virginia State Police from a group of college students on a geology field trip exploring the abandoned coal mine shafts near Beckley in the rugged mountains of southern West Virginia. The students had been documenting geological formations in the Hatfield-McCoy region when they discovered what appeared to be personal belongings and clothing remnants scattered in a remote section of the mine known as Devil's Hollow, approximately 4 miles from the nearest access road and reachable only by a treacherous hiking trail that had been officially closed since the mine's abandonment in 1985. Among the items recovered were 2 tarnished friendship bracelets bearing the names Amy and Sarah, fragments of denim and cotton fabric consistent with 1990s teenage clothing, and most significantly, a West Virginia driver's license bearing the name Amy Lynn Morrison, issued in March 1997 to a 16-year-old resident of Sophia, West Virginia. Amy Morrison had been 17 years old when she and her 15-year-old sister, Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, disappeared on the evening of August 23, 1997, after leaving the Raleigh County Fair in Beckley, where they had spent the day riding carnival attractions, eating funnel cake, and meeting friends from their rural community. The Morrison sisters were inseparable, known throughout Sophia and the surrounding coal mining communities for their close bond, their shared love of country music, and their dreams of someday leaving West Virginia to pursue careers in Nashville's music industry. Amy was a senior at Sophia High School, where she played guitar in the school's country music ensemble and worked part-time at Morrison's General Store, the family business that had served the local community for 3 generations. Sarah was a sophomore at the same school, an honor roll student who sang in the church choir and had recently been accepted into a summer music program at Marshall University in Huntington. The evening the Morrison sisters vanished had begun as a celebration, with their parents, Robert and Carol Morrison, giving the girls permission to attend the fair's final night festivities and allowing them to drive the family's 1989 Ford Escort to Beckley, a 20-minute drive through winding mountain roads from their home in Sophia. The sisters had been accompanied by their cousin Jessica Blake and 2 friends from school, but the group had split up around 8:30 p.m. when Amy and Sarah decided to enter a local talent competition while the others chose to ride the Ferris wheel one final time before the fair closed. Security footage from the fair's main stage showed Amy and Sarah performing a duet of Patsy Cline's Crazy at 9:15 p.m., receiving enthusiastic applause from the crowd and placing second in the competition, earning a $50 prize that they planned to save toward recording equipment for their musical aspirations. When 11 p.m. arrived, without the sisters returning to meet their friends at the predetermined location near the fair's entrance, Jessica Blake became concerned and began searching the fairgrounds with fair security personnel. The search revealed that Amy and Sarah had last been seen near the parking area at approximately 10:30 p.m., carrying their guitar case and the small stuffed animals they had won at carnival games earlier in the evening. The sisters' Ford Escort was missing from the parking lot, leading initial responders to assume that Amy and Sarah had simply decided to drive home early without informing their friends, perhaps because they were tired after their performance or excited about their second-place finish in the talent competition. The search for Amy and Sarah Morrison began officially on the morning of August 24th, when Robert Morrison discovered that his daughters had never returned home from the fair. and that their car was not in the family's driveway or anywhere on their rural property. Morrison immediately drove the route between Sophia and Beckley, checking every gas station, restaurant, and scenic overlook where the sisters might have stopped, but found no trace of either the girls or their vehicle. By 10 a.m., both parents were deeply worried, and they contacted the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office to report Amy and Sarah missing, initiating a search that would consume the community's attention and resources for months without producing any credible leads or explanations. The Morrison sisters' Ford Escort was discovered 3 days later, on August 27th, by a group of hunters who noticed the vehicle partially concealed in heavy brush along a logging road approximately 15 miles southeast of Beckley, in a remote area of the new River Gorge, known for its treacherous terrain and limited accessibility. The car appeared to have been deliberately hidden, covered with branches, and positioned behind large boulders that made it invisible from the main logging road. The vehicle's doors were unlocked, with the keys missing, and no signs of the sisters' personal belongings except for Sarah's small purse, which contained her student ID, $23 in cash, and a photograph of Amy and Sarah performing together at their church's Easter service earlier that year. Detective Michael Stevens of the West Virginia State Police was assigned as lead investigator when Amy and Sarah's case was classified as a potential abduction on August 28th, after extensive searches of the new River Gorge area failed to locate any trace of the missing sisters. Stevens was a 15-year veteran with specialized training in missing person cases and rural crime investigation, and he immediately recognized the complexity of searching the vast wilderness areas surrounding the discovery site, where dense forests, steep ravines, and abandoned mine shafts created thousands of potential locations where evidence or bodies could be hidden indefinitely. Stevens began coordinating with multiple agencies, including the National Guard, local volunteer fire departments, and specialized cave rescue teams familiar with the region's underground mine networks. Robert and Carol Morrison were third-generation residents of Sophia, a small coal mining community where Robert operated Morrison's general store and Carol taught elementary school at the local public school. The Morrison family lived in a modest house on Main Street, within walking distance of both the store and the school, and they were active members of Sophia Baptist Church, where Robert served as a deacon and Carol directed the children's choir. Amy and Sarah had been raised in this close-knit community where everyone knew each other's families, where children walked freely to school and played unsupervised in the surrounding mountains, and where violent crime was virtually unheard of, except for occasional domestic disputes and alcohol-related incidents. The disappearance of Amy and Sarah Morrison generated intense media coverage throughout West Virginia and neighboring states, partly because of the mystery surrounding their abandoned car, and partly because the case represented every parent's worst nightmare about the vulnerability of teenagers in rural areas where help could be hours away. The story was featured on local television news programs, in newspapers throughout the Appalachian region, and eventually on national television shows, including Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted. The media attention brought thousands of volunteers to assist in search efforts, but it also attracted attention from well-meaning but misguided individuals who interfered with the investigation by conducting unauthorized searches and spreading unsubstantiated rumors about the sisters' fate. The initial investigation focused on the possibility that Amy and Sarah had been abducted by someone familiar with the local area, perhaps someone who had seen them perform at the fair and had followed them when they left. Detective Stevens conducted extensive interviews with fair employees, carnival workers, and attendees who had been present during the talent competition, but none of these interviews produced credible suspects or witnesses who had seen anything unusual near the parking area when the sisters disappeared. Stevens also investigated registered sex offenders in Raleigh County and surrounding areas, but found no connections to the Morrison sisters or evidence of involvement in their disappearance. The investigation was complicated by the challenging terrain where the sisters' car had been discovered, an area that included active and abandoned coal mines, logging operations, hunting camps, and illegal marijuana cultivation sites operated by individuals who were naturally suspicious of law enforcement presence. Search teams faced dangers from unstable mine shafts, contaminated water sources, and booby traps set by drug producers to protect their operations. The searches were also hampered by West Virginia's notoriously unpredictable weather, with early autumn storms making some areas inaccessible for days at a time and washing away potential evidence that might have been left on the ground. Detective Stevens also investigated the possibility that Amy and Sarah's disappearance might be connected to Robert Morrison's business or to family conflicts that had not been previously disclosed. Stevens learned that Morrison's general store served as an informal community center where local residents gathered to discuss politics, gossip, and business matters, and that Robert Morrison sometimes extended credit to customers who were struggling financially due to mine closures and economic decline in the region. However, Stevens found no evidence of serious disputes or threats that might explain the sisters' disappearance as an act of retaliation against their father. As autumn turned to winter without any breakthrough in the case, investigators began focusing more intensively on the possibility that Amy and Sarah had been killed and their bodies disposed of in the vast network of abandoned coal mines that honeycombed the mountains around Beckley. Mine rescue specialists from across West Virginia volunteered their expertise and equipment to search accessible mine shafts, but the effort was dangerous and technically challenging, requiring specialized breathing equipment and safety measures to protect searchers from toxic gases, unstable ceilings, and flooded chambers. Many mines had been sealed or had collapsed over the decades since their abandonment, making comprehensive searches impossible with available resources and technology. The investigation into Amy and Sarah's disappearance was further complicated by jurisdictional issues and limited resources available to rural law enforcement agencies in West Virginia. The case involved multiple counties, state and federal land, and mining properties with complex ownership histories that made it difficult to obtain search warrants and coordinate investigative efforts. The FBI became involved due to the possibility that the sisters had been transported across state lines, but federal resources were limited, and agents were unfamiliar with the local terrain and community dynamics that were crucial to understanding the case. By spring 1998, Amy and Sarah's case had been unofficially classified as cold, though Detective Stevens continued following up on tips and reviewing evidence whenever new information became available. The Morrison family hired private investigators and established a reward fund that eventually grew to $75,000 for information leading to the recovery of their daughters. Robert Morrison also organized an annual search weekend, bringing together volunteers from throughout the region to systematically explore areas that had not been thoroughly investigated, continuing these efforts for over 15 years until his health began to fail and family resources were exhausted. The years following Amy and Sarah's disappearance devastated the Morrison family and the broader Sophia community, which struggled to maintain its sense of safety and normalcy in the absence of answers about what had happened to two of its most beloved young residents. Robert Morrison's health declined significantly due to stress and depression, forcing him to sell Morrison's General Store in 2005 and ending a family business that had served the community since the 1920s. Carol Morrison continued teaching but required extensive counseling and medication to cope with anxiety and the constant uncertainty about her daughter's fate, eventually retiring early due to her inability to concentrate on her professional responsibilities. The close-knit community of Sophia was profoundly affected by Amy and Sarah's disappearance, with many families implementing new safety rules and restrictions that fundamentally changed the character of a place where children had always enjoyed considerable freedom and independence. Parents began driving their teenagers to events rather than allowing them to drive themselves, and community gatherings became smaller and more cautious affairs as residents struggled to balance their traditional way of life with new awareness of potential dangers. Sophia Baptist Church established a memorial garden for Amy and Sarah, featuring 2 oak trees planted side by side to symbolize their unbreakable bond and their continuing presence in the hearts of community members who had watched them grow up together. Detective Stevens retired from the West Virginia State Police in 2015, but he maintained personal files on Amy and Sarah's case and continued investigating leads whenever new information became available. Stevens had developed strong suspicions about several potential suspects over the years, focusing particularly on individuals who had worked at the coal mines in the area, and who had detailed knowledge of the remote locations where the sisters' car was found and where their bodies might have been hidden. Stevens believed that the sisters' killer was likely someone who lived or worked in the area and who had been familiar with their family and their routines, making the crime an act of opportunity rather than a random encounter. The breakthrough in Amy and Sarah's case came through advances in genealogical DNA analysis that allowed investigators to identify suspects through family tree reconstruction, using genetic material from crime scenes. In March 2024, forensic genealogists working with the West Virginia State Police were able to develop a DNA profile from hair fibers found in the Morrison sisters' abandoned car, fibers that had been preserved for over 26 years in evidence storage. The DNA analysis identified potential family connections that led investigators to focus on descendants of several local families, ultimately identifying a suspect through a combination of genetic testing and traditional detective work. The DNA analysis pointed to Marcus Wayne Caldwell, age 52, a former coal miner and current maintenance worker for the Raleigh County School District, who had lived in the Beckley area his entire life. Caldwell had been 26 years old in 1997, working as equipment operator at the Thunder Ridge Mine, located less than 5 miles from where the Morrison sisters' car had been discovered. Employment records showed that Caldwell had requested time off on August 25, 1997. claiming he needed to deal with a family emergency. But subsequent investigation revealed that no such emergency had occurred, and that Caldwell had lied to his supervisors to obtain the absence during the critical period when search efforts were beginning. When investigators reviewed Caldwell's background, they discovered a disturbing pattern of behavior toward young women that had never been properly investigated or documented. Former co-workers described Caldwell as someone who made inappropriate comments about female customers at local businesses and who seemed to pay unusual attention to teenage girls in the community. Several women who had been teenagers in the 1990s remembered Caldwell making them uncomfortable with his persistent attention and unwanted attempts at conversation, though none had reported these incidents at the time or connected them to Amy and Sarah's disappearance. On September 19, 2024, exactly 1 week after Amy and Sarah's belongings were discovered in Devil's Hollow, West Virginia State Police detectives arrested Marcus Caldwell at his home in Beckley on charges of kidnapping and murder. The arrest was conducted by a team of 8 officers who had coordinated with local school officials to ensure that Caldwell was taken into custody away from the elementary school where he worked as a maintenance supervisor. Caldwell initially denied any knowledge of Amy and Sarah Morrison, claiming that he had never met the sisters and had no involvement in their disappearance. But his denials were contradicted by witness statements and physical evidence that placed him in their vicinity on the night they vanished. The news of Caldwell's arrest shocked both the Beckley and Sophia communities, where he had been a familiar figure for decades, and where many residents had encountered him through his work at local schools. Caldwell's neighbors and co-workers described him as quiet and reliable, someone who kept to himself and who had never caused obvious problems or attracted attention from law enforcement. However, more detailed investigation revealed that Caldwell had a history of alcohol abuse, domestic violence, and inappropriate behavior toward women that had been overlooked or minimized by community members who preferred to avoid confrontation or involvement in others' personal problems. The investigation that followed Caldwell's arrest revealed additional evidence that strengthened the case against him and suggested that he might have committed other crimes that had never been solved. Detectives discovered that Caldwell had detailed knowledge of the abandoned mine areas where Amy and Sarah's belongings were found, knowledge that he had acquired through years of exploring the region during hunting and fishing expeditions. Investigators also found camping equipment and tools in Caldwell's possession that could have been used to transport and dispose of bodies in remote locations, as well as photographs and maps showing his familiarity with the specific areas where evidence had been discovered. Caldwell's ex-wife, Patricia Caldwell, provided crucial information about his behavior and psychological state during the period when Amy and Sarah disappeared. Patricia testified that Caldwell had been drinking heavily in August 1997 and had been increasingly agitated and violent toward her, eventually leading to their separation and divorce in early 1998. Patricia also described Caldwell's obsession with young women and his frequent comments about wanting to teach lessons to girls who he believed were disrespectful or immoral. Patricia said that Caldwell had seemed unusually nervous and paranoid in the weeks following the Morrison sisters' disappearance, avoiding local gathering places and becoming angry when the case was mentioned in conversation. The prosecution of Marcus Caldwell was handled by Raleigh County Prosecuting Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who had extensive experience in violent crime cases and who was determined to secure justice for Amy and Sarah Morrison and closure for their surviving family members. Walsh's case relied on DNA evidence, circumstantial evidence connecting Caldwell to the crime scene, and testimony from witnesses who could describe his behavior patterns and opportunity to commit the murders. The prosecution also utilized geological analysis that showed Caldwell's intimate knowledge of the mine areas was consistent with someone who had used these locations to dispose of evidence and possibly bodies. The defense strategy focused on challenging the reliability of DNA evidence that had been stored for over 26 years and arguing that Caldwell's knowledge of local mining areas was common among residents who had grown up in the region. Caldwell's attorney, public defender Thomas Mitchell, argued that the DNA sample could have been contaminated during storage or analysis, and that Caldwell's presence at the fair or in the general area on the night the sisters disappeared did not prove that he had committed murder. Mitchell also argued that Caldwell's ex-wife's testimony was motivated by personal animosity and should not be considered reliable evidence of his guilt. The trial began in June 2024 in a Raleigh County courthouse that was packed with media representatives, community members, and family members who had waited over 27 years for someone to be held accountable for Amy and Sarah's deaths. Robert Morrison, now 73 years old and in declining health, attended every day of the trial accompanied by Carol Morrison and other family members who had never stopped believing that the truth about their daughter's fate would eventually be revealed. The Morrison family had prepared victim impact statements describing the devastating effect that Amy and Sarah's disappearance had had on their lives and their community. But they also expressed gratitude that advances in forensic science had finally made it possible to identify their killer. The prosecution's case included detailed testimony from forensic scientists who explained how DNA analysis technology had evolved since 1997, making it possible to extract reliable genetic profiles from evidence that had been considered too degraded for testing when it was originally collected. Expert witnesses described the statistical improbability that the DNA found in the sisters' car belonged to someone other than Caldwell, concluding that the genetic evidence provided overwhelming support for his involvement in their deaths. The prosecution also presented evidence showing that Caldwell had provided false information about his whereabouts and activities during the crucial time period when Amy and Sarah disappeared. Patricia Caldwell's testimony provided critical insight into her ex-husband's personality, behavior patterns, and psychological state during the relevant time period. Patricia described Caldwell's increasing violence and instability during 1997, his obsession with controlling women's behavior, and his detailed knowledge of remote areas where bodies could be disposed of without discovery. Patricia also testified that Caldwell had made threatening comments about dealing with people who crossed him, or who he believed had disrespected him, and that he had seemed unusually agitated and paranoid in the weeks following the Morrison sisters' disappearance. The defense called character witnesses who testified about Caldwell's reputation as a steady worker and community member, emphasizing his decades of employment and his lack of serious criminal convictions. Defense experts also challenged the prosecution's DNA evidence, arguing that the genetic sample was too old and potentially contaminated to provide reliable results, and suggesting that the laboratory procedures used to analyze the evidence might have produced false positive results. The defense argued that Caldwell was being prosecuted based on circumstantial evidence and scientific testing that was not sufficiently reliable to support murder convictions beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 6 days before returning guilty verdicts on charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping for both Amy and Sarah Morrison, concluding that the prosecution had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Caldwell had killed both sisters during the commission of kidnapping in August 1997. The verdicts were announced on July 8, 2024. With Caldwell showing little emotion as the jury, Foreman read the guilty verdicts on all charges. Members of the Morrison family embraced each other through tears as they realized that more than 27 years after their daughter's disappearance, someone would finally be held accountable for their deaths. Judge Robert Hamilton sentenced Marcus Caldwell to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, describing his crimes as representing calculated and predatory attacks on innocent young women whose lives had been filled with promise and potential. Judge Hamilton noted that Caldwell had used his knowledge of local terrain and mining operations to commit and conceal his crimes, taking advantage of the isolation and trust that characterized rural communities in West Virginia. The judge also ordered Caldwell to pay restitution to the Morrison family, though he acknowledged that no amount of money could compensate for their loss or the decades of uncertainty they had endured. The conviction of Marcus Caldwell led to renewed efforts to locate Amy and Sarah's remains, using information from his interrogations and the physical evidence found in Devil's Hollow to identify potential burial sites in the abandoned mine networks around Beckley. Search teams returned to the new River Gorge area with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, focusing on mine shafts and chambers that Caldwell had been known to frequent during his hunting and fishing activities. The searches continued to be dangerous and technically challenging, but investigators remained committed to providing the Morrison family with the closure that would come from recovering the sisters' bodies and giving them proper burial. Robert Morrison, despite his failing health, used Caldwell's conviction as an opportunity to advocate for improved resources and training for rural law enforcement agencies handling missing person cases. Morrison testified before the West Virginia legislature about the challenges faced by small-town police departments and county sheriff's offices that lacked the specialized equipment and expertise needed to investigate complex disappearances in mountainous terrain. Morrison supported legislation providing additional funding for search and rescue operations and for training programs that would help rural officers develop skills needed to handle cases involving remote crime scenes and difficult terrain. Carol Morrison established an educational scholarship program at Marshall University in Amy and Sarah's memory, providing financial assistance to students from rural West Virginia communities who were pursuing careers in education, music, or social work. The scholarship program was funded through donations from the community and through proceeds from Carol's book about her family's experience, titled Waiting for Answers, A Mother's 27-Year Search for Her Daughters. The book helped raise awareness about missing person cases in rural areas and the importance of maintaining hope and persistence even when investigations seemed to reach insurmountable obstacles. The Sophia community organized a memorial service for Amy and Sarah Morrison, Following Caldwell's conviction, providing an opportunity for residents to honor the sisters' memory and acknowledge the impact their disappearance had had on their close-knit community. The service was held at Sophia Baptist Church, where both girls had been active members, and it featured musical performances of songs that Amy and Sarah had performed together, including their final performance of Crazy at the Raleigh County Fair. The service also recognized the importance of community vigilance and the need to protect vulnerable young people while preserving the trust and openness that made small communities special places to live and raise families. The house on Main Street, where Amy and Sarah had grown up, was eventually sold by their parents, who found it too difficult to continue living in a place filled with memories of their daughter's childhood and dreams for their musical careers. The new owners agreed to maintain a small memorial garden featuring Amy and Sarah's favorite flowers and a bench where community members could sit and remember the sisters who had brought joy and music to so many lives. The garden serves as a peaceful place for reflection and ensures that Amy and Sarah's presence will always be felt in the community where they had planned to make their mark before pursuing their dreams beyond the mountains of West Virginia. The trails and mine entrances in Devil's Hollow, where Amy and Sarah's belongings were discovered, were permanently marked with warning signs and memorial plaques honoring the sisters' memory. The area was designated as a crime scene memorial, recognizing that it had been the site of a horrific tragedy, while also serving as a reminder that justice could prevail, even in cases that seemed hopeless for decades. Local hiking groups and school organizations began visiting the memorial as part of safety education programs, learning about the importance of staying together in remote areas and reporting suspicious behavior to authorities. On the 28th anniversary of Amy and Sarah's disappearance, August 23, 2025, the Morrison family held a private ceremony celebrating the sisters' lives and the justice that had finally been achieved through Caldwell's conviction. The ceremony was attended by investigators, prosecutors, community members, and the many volunteers who had participated in search efforts over the years. Robert Morrison, speaking with the help of an oxygen tank due to his declining health, thanked everyone who had never stopped believing that the truth could be discovered and that justice could be achieved, even after nearly 3 decades of uncertainty. Today, Marshall University's music program features a practice room dedicated to Amy and Sarah Morrison's memory, providing a space where students can develop their musical talents while being inspired by the sisters' dedication to their craft and their dreams of using music to bring joy to others. The room's walls display photographs of Amy and Sarah performing together, along with sheet music from songs they had planned to record and perform professionally. The memorial serves as a reminder that talent and dreams can inspire others even when life is tragically cut short, and that the pursuit of justice and truth can honor the memory of those who are no longer able to speak for themselves. The conviction of Marcus Caldwell closed one of West Virginia's most enduring missing person cases, providing closure for the Morrison family and demonstrating that advances in forensic science and persistent investigation can bring justice even in rural cases that seem impossible to solve due to challenging terrain and limited resources. Caldwell's life sentence ensures that he will never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people, while Amy and Sarah's legacy continues to inspire positive change in law enforcement training, victim support services, and community safety awareness. Though the sisters' lives were tragically brief, their impact on others continues to grow through the scholarship program, memorial facilities, and advocacy work that resulted from their case, proving that love, music, and the pursuit of justice can triumph over even the darkest crimes and the longest periods of uncertainty.